All right, our next question, Jim, was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from David Pillman. Hey, Jim, I have some questions regarding Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I was and still am a huge fan of the product and look fondly back on the days of wrestling the way it used to be and the way you like it. But I digress. On to the questions. I was at a lot of the early Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV tapings, most notably the debut of the Heavenly Bodies, which happened in my high school gym. My question, though, is...
Oh, my God. Wait a minute. That was that in Harriman? Harriman, Tennessee, possibly. I'm trying to remember what town that was. Anyway, go ahead.
My question, though, is during the course of the night, I saw Manny Fernandez there. And this isn't a phantom sighting, as he signed my Crockett Cup program. But he wasn't used on any of the 4 shows that were taped that night. Was Manny just there on a standby? What would the Raging Bull have done had he been used that night?
You know, and I would have had no memory of this until it was phrased in such a way like that there may have been, because Manny lived for a while in North Carolina. And I mean, this is like, if we introduced Heavenly Bodies at that taping, this was like, I believe, like the 5th or 6th at tops television taping we had done, counting the first 2 we did the previous year in late 91. And so I was getting job guys from the Carolinas or job guys from the area. And I'm not saying that Manny was a job guy, but I'm saying he may have driven somebody or ridden with somebody or come to talk to or visit somebody. It seems like I almost remember that he was there sometime, but I'm sure he was probably sniffing around. I don't know. But I never asked Manny Fernandez to come to a taping or had any intentions of using Manny Fernandez or booking Manny Fernandez. And that's not, I don't mean for that to sound as horrible as it did also, but you go back and look in the 80s, Manny Fernandez physically and athletically and his work was as good and believable and realistic as you can possibly fucking find.
Yeah.
And especially for a guy that size, to do some of that stuff, and he'd bleed and he could sell and he could babyface or heel and he could do a fired up promo, which went on a little long if you didn't produce him. But Manny also just sometimes got involved in some shady things. And by that point, I thought we were moving in a different direction. So I don't know. Well, now I've made it sound like he was an international goddamn drug smuggler. No, I don't mean that. Because Manny was always kind of and this is affectionate, somewhat a bullshit artist. He used to, one time he's playing cards on Crockett's plane with Dennis Condrey, right? And they're playing cards on a little fold down table in between the seats. And all of a sudden, Manny just, and he kind of bends over sideways. He puts his hand up to his ribs, kind of rubbing his side. Dennis told me this right after he did it, right? And I said, what was he doing? Manny said, well, no, it's just some shrapnel I've still got from Nam. He wasn't in fucking Nam, and he wasn't the fucking NFL football player on the Dolphins or Tampa or whatever the fuck Manny Fernandez. That's what I'm talking about, that type of stuff. It just,
Did you get a lot of guys, especially in the early days of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, showing up, fishing around, seeing if there was work?
No, not really, because you didn't do that then. Except if you were riding with a good friend, like a member of your family, like Road Dogg, Brian Armstrong came to a couple of shows with the family before he ever, before he ever worked, I think. But no, guys didn't just go unless it was really obvious in those days. If you just went to a show that you weren't booked on and you weren't riding with your best friend, and just for Undertaker, I've told a story, rode with Brian Lee one time when they were still friends to one of my spot shows in Eastern Kentucky, just 3 hours from Nashville, just to get out of the house and ride with Brian. It was like that time Andre came to visit Ivan Koloff at that fucking spot show in North Carolina. He walked in the back door and you never saw him again. People were like, oh, fuck, it's Undertaker. I said, because the locker rooms were separate. I'll get back to whatever the question was in a minute, and as soon as I remember what it was, but the locker rooms were separate, right? I think it was like Albany, Kentucky. So fucking Hildebrand comes over and says, hey, Undertaker's over on the other side with Brian Lee. I'm like, what the fuck? And I said, send word, ask him if he wants to do a fucking run-in. I could pay him $100, right? He didn't want to do it. But that was fucking great. I was like, fuck, I could have probably made him $1,000 if he'd have known he was just going to impromptu fucking jump in the car with Brian. I could have had pictures he could autograph for 30 minutes. But anyway, sometimes that happens, but most of the time, no. I was always taught it was bad form because it looked like you were begging for a job. I remember here's another thing. When Jim Crockett ran Dallas for the first time, but World Class was still in business. A couple of the fucking guys, I think Buddy Roberts was one of them. A couple of the guys came over and were like visiting at Reunion Arena, but it was uncomfortable. And San Antonio was worse because we went to the Hemisphere for Crockett one time, and that's when it wasn't even Southwest anymore. It was at not even Fred Barron. Who was after Fred Barron in San Antonio? The business in San Antonio was on its ass, and a bunch of the guys were standing out back and visiting, and I always felt queasy about that. You don't go unless you're booked or elsewise you are of the status where you can just fucking come and hang out and visit, and nobody's even going to fucking bother you.
Before I move on to his next question, did you have anything else on Manny?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. He had colorful stories of how he'd had these and the story he used to tell with Tully. And see, you never knew which side to believe in these things because Tully was capable of all this stuff at the same time also. But he claimed that the heat between him and Tully came from a time when they were both riding in a fucking car and they stopped at a liquor store and Manny got out and some guys were calling wrestling fake. And he had to fight them and beat them all up, and they had knives. But when he looked over at Tully for help, Tully was rolling the car window up. But of course, Manny beat them all up anyway. But he was Bobby Jaggers, but he didn't even wink at you a little bit. Bobby Jaggers would tell those stories and did kind of wink at you almost a little bit, or at least have that fucking Edgar Buchanan or Smiley Burnett fucking way of telling a story that is complete bullshit that doesn't offend you. But Manny's bullshit was a lot of bullshit.